it with us. Come on. We believe in freedom, freedom till it comes. To me, young people come first. They have the courage where we fail. And if I can but shed some light as they carry us through the gate.
Well, good afternoon to everyone. We are glad you have taken the time to join us in this forum on Your Vote, Your Voice Matters. My name is Leonard Lewis, and I'm a member of the School of Education, Caring and Democratic Ad Hoc Committee, the committee that has organized this forum to educate the public about the importance of voting in this crucial election. We look forward to a healthy discussion on the importance of voting on November the 3rd, which I'm sure you are aware of since you have been bombarded by social media messages, TV ads, and emails reminding us of the importance of this election. So we hope this forum will give us the opportunity to explore and share important information about why we should take this election seriously. But since this event is only 1 hour, let's get started as I introduce the Interim Dean of the School of Education, Dr. Edwin Lamboy, who will formally welcome you and introduce the moderator and panelists for today's event. Dr. Lamboy.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Good evening, everybody. I'm Edwin Lamboy, Interim Dean of the CCNY School of Education. I'd like to welcome you. I also want to thank the workshop, there's a long list, the Workshop Center Subcommittee of the Centennial Celebration. I want to thank Dr. Vanessa Valdez and the Black Studies Program, the School of Education Executive Committee, and if I'm missing one of the sponsoring committees, my apologies. Welcome to all of you. As Professor Lewis said, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, this is an extremely important election, and I'm looking forward to learning from our panelists. Now I'd like to introduce Professor Nancy Cardwell.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I'm very happy that so many of you are able to take some time to join us this evening. This is an issue that's close to many of our hearts, and as educators, it's very important that we raise our voices to make sure that our needs are met, and in protest, in support, and at the voting box. And so we're here this evening to learn more about the larger context and the meaning of voting, and also the meaning of voting right now. I just want to share on a personal note, my great-grandmother was born a slave and was a child in emancipation. And she was an avid suffragette, and she was able to become among the first Black women to register to vote in Lynchburg, Virginia. And so these issues and this work is very near and dear to my heart. And it's very meaningful to have all of you here. And so I would like to now introduce our first presenter, Professor Vanessa Valdez, who is the director of the Black Studies program at the City College of New York.
Thank you. Thank you all for the invitation. I'm really excited to see as many of you in here as possible on a Wednesday at 5 o'clock, hours away from our vice presidential debate this evening. So I wanted to talk a little bit about just the historical context of voting, because oftentimes we are bombarded with vote, 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 and we don't know, like, okay, sure. Or people say, oh, well, what's the history of it? Or remember the history, or people died for you to vote, all of that. So I wanted to just give a little bit of a context of this. So if anyone saw Blackish earlier this week, you had a really interesting moment where Michael Eric Dyson, who will be coming to City College virtually as our Langston Hughes Festival honoree, he was featured on Blackish as saying that at the time of the founding of the country with the Constitution, with the ratification of the Constitution, that 6% of the population was eligible to vote. You had to be a white male with property. And even then, that didn't mean that you could vote. 6%, right? So at the time of the writing of We the People, right, the definition of who the people were is a very interesting thing. Okay, so white men who had land could vote. And the history of this country is the expansion of the vote. So we fast forward to the US Civil War. Civil War ends in 1865, right? And at the time of that, after the Civil War, legislators had to figure out how to bring back the Confederacy to be the Union, right? We were going to be the United States of America. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. That passed and was ratified that year. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship to formerly enslaved peoples. That doesn't get ratified by the states until 1868. Okay, and I'll put all this in the chat. The 15th Amendment, right? Oftentimes we think, oh, okay, but people got the right to vote at the end of the Civil War. That was ratified by the states in 1870, and it gave African-American men the right to vote. Only African-American men the right to vote. And so the suffragette movement, right, which comes out of the abolitionist movement, because so many suffragettes were abolitionists as well, the fight for women to vote. This was a key moment, this fight between, particularly white suffragettes and Black male abolitionists, such as Frederick. The key fight is Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony. Right? And a lot of white suffragettes did not want Black men to vote. They wanted to join their counterparts and be able to vote. And so from 1870 until 1920, right, this year we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which gave women in the United States the right to vote. But in practice, African-American women, the majority of which lived in the US South, could not vote. Right? Why? Because post-Reconstruction, with the rise of domestic terrorism, KKK, people leaving the South to come up north and to the West with Great Migration, those who remained were blocked from voting because there were such things as literacy tests, there were poll taxes, people would try to go to vote and someone would say, okay, well, how many bubbles are there in a bar of soap? And if you didn't guess right, you couldn't do it. You couldn't vote. Or read this. They would take out the dictionary and ask them to read. And if they couldn't read, that's literacy test. They weren't allowed to vote. All of that is illegal, right? But it was not, or one would think it was illegal, but it wasn't until 1965 and the passage of the Voting Rights Act, where President Lyndon B. Johnson actually explicitly said that those kinds of things, those kinds of practices were outlawed. And so for African-American women in particular, they could not vote for another, from 1870, for another almost 100 years. So really, when we're talking about the expansion, and then in those years also, I'm not speaking about Native American women, I'm not speaking about Hispanic women, like all these different, like women got the vote at different times in this country. So all of that is happening. So, okay, we go, great, everything's fine. 2020, we're good. Well, 7 years ago, in 2013, actually the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was gutted by a Supreme Court decision, right? Shelby v. Holder, in which Shelby County in North Carolina, I believe, said that, they wanted to do away with certain provisions of the Voting Rights Act. One of the things that the Voting Rights Act of 65 said was, if any place wanted to make changes to voting laws, they actually had to, and they had a record of discrimination, they actually had to gain permission from the federal government in order to do that. And the Supreme Court decision in 2013 outlawed that, saying it was illegal, right? Chief Justice Roberts said that, the conditions which had necessitated the Voting Rights Act of 65 had already been ameliorated by 2013, and so we could do away with that. And what that has meant is what we are currently seeing, We are seeing a defunding of the U.S. Postal Service. We are seeing poll places being changed, right? Across this country. We're seeing states being allowed to set up their own, determine like where the poll places are going to be, if they're going to shut down poll places. We're seeing states set up if voters will need photo ID. All of that, you're not supposed to have any of that. And yet, this fight for the vote, this is what we're seeing currently. And so, in 2016, of course, was our last election, presidential election. In 2016, 65% of white non-Hispanic voters turns out to vote, whereas 59% of Black voters turns out, 49% of Asian voters, and 48% of Hispanic voters, which if we do the mathematics, that means, 52% of Hispanic voters, eligible Hispanic voters, did not vote. 51% of eligible Asian voters did not vote, right? 41% of eligible Black voters did not vote, and only 35% of eligible white voters voted. And so that's incredibly important, again, because we look at who's voting, right? That's by racial demographic. In terms of age, 68% of seniors cast a ballot, whereas only 39% of voters ages 18 to 24, 39% voted. Huge block of people. So as we are thinking about outreach, as we are thinking about the importance, I think these last 4 years have demonstrated in a much more visceral way than many of us have lived, the importance of voting. The vote, as I stated in my class yesterday, the vote is not the sole means of the revolution, but it is one part of it. The vote is, protest is, calling our senators, calling our congresspeople, holding our elected officials accountable, getting involved. And so, I think that we are seeing in this run up to this election, early voting in the state starts in a matter of weeks. And we have voted for easier voting in New York State. It's the reason we have early voting. It's the reason we have absentee ballots, because prior to that last election, we the voters voted for those changes in this state, catching up with other states. And so I urge everyone, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but if you have not already asked for a ballot, please, and you plan on, mailing in your vote or walking your vote to a polling place, please do so as soon as possible. We need every vote cast in this election. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right on point. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to invite our next speaker, Tabari Bhavani, who is the principal of the Nelson Mandela School for Social Justice in Brooklyn, to share his thoughts with us.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I just want to say, Professor Valdez got me excited over here. And my kids are warning me that Brother Bob Lebesky already told me, don't go on too long and don't talk too loud. So I'm going to try to stay inside those parameters. So, I fashion myself a little bit of a griot. And so whenever I get a chance to talk to people, especially people I don't know, I like to start out with a short story. So do you mind if I tell you a short story? All right, I'll tell you a story about my mom, right? So my mom, we call her the hip hop political grandma. From the time I was a toddler, my mom has always taught us about politics and music. My mother introduced me to Andy Young when I was probably like about 8 or 9 years old. My mother used to work for Whitney M. Young Jr. as the secretary. So here was a woman who just went to high school, graduated, went into the workforce, but somehow made her way into meeting some really influential people and introduced them to their kids. Now, I've always considered myself a radical. And so I remember one day we were sitting in my mother's house in Hollis, Queens, and I started talking nonsense. I told my mother, I'm not voting. When I get old enough, this is nonsense. You got to take it to the streets. And I remember my mother said, okay. She said, I'm gonna ask you a question. She said, if I asked you and your brother to go outside and build something in our backyard, small backyard in Hollis, Queens, and I gave you a hammer that was rusty, would you throw away the hammer and use a screwdriver to bang a nail in? So I was like, of course not. That doesn't make any sense to me. And she was like, so because the process of voting might be a little bit rusty, why would you throw it away? And so that kind of changed my focus. And I began to realize on a very political, ancestral level, that any tool that you have for change or reform, you embrace that tool and you use it for whatever it can get you. Because tossing it away or throwing it away is throwing away a possibility of ameliorating the oppression and the struggle of people that you claim to care about, right? And I am not willing to watch people burn on a funeral pyre just for my politics, right? So I can say that I looked like I was a radical. And so 7 years ago, I had the opportunity to open up a new school in Bedford-Stuyvesant. And the school is named the Nelson Mandela School for Social Justice. And so as we start talking about, thinking about things like civic engagement, right? When we start talking about trying to build young people's critical consciousness, I had to struggle with, what does that mean? Like, what do we do? What do we teach them? And so over the last 2 years, as we began to have our second and our third graduating class, we began to invite people in to talk about voting, to kind of register some of our older students for voting. And so some of my older friends who worked with me when I used to work at a transfer school in Bushwick section of Brooklyn, they walked into my office and they was like, so now you are getting people to register to vote. What's going on? And so first, of course, you know what I did? I told them the hammer story. Second, I told them that as an African person in America, I have an ancestral obligation to embrace this process, that my ancestor died so that I can arrogantly ignore it. That would not be somebody who believes in the power of Sankofa or Sankofa principles. And so for me, what I say to young people is, one, there is a possibility of some type of reform or some type of ameliorating our positions. I agree with Professor Valdez 1001%. That is all of it. There's not one piece of strategy that will give us everything that we need. And so you do not throw away any of it, right? So I believe in that. I believe in the ancestral obligation. I believe that it is part of our civic engagement and responsibility to teach young people that this is what you should be doing. And if you can't vote right now, make sure that your mom and your dad go, right? If you can't vote right now, make sure that Abuelita is registered so that she can go. Walk with them. The first time I had the opportunity to vote for Obama, I took my two young daughters with me to vote. This year, my oldest daughter will be voting. I will not tell her who to vote for, but she knows what is the criteria to live in my house. And so I'm sure, I'm sure she'll vote with that in mind, or she just won't tell me the truth. And so I don't want to take up a lot of time. I just wanted to share that with you. I think that everybody who wants to be an educator, we have to find ways to let our young people understand that no one ever said that casting a ballot will remove all the chains. That would be an illogical conversation. But what is even worse is that if you don't cast a ballot, you have no way of making sure that you can find any wiggle room. You have no way to ensure that your voice can be heard. And so I appreciate being invited. I think this is a wonderful opportunity. I think I'm gonna stop there because I could go on for another 45 minutes, but then y'all would be mad at me. And plus me talking for 45 minutes will not get you any credit. And so thank you everybody for inviting me. And I'll be here for the rest of the night.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'd like to ask Charlotte Estridge, who's from the New York Public Interest Research Group, to give some specific information on how to vote, how to register to vote, and making plans to vote. I know that perhaps not everyone may be able to vote, but learning this information is important so that you can share it with those who can. So thank you very much to our speakers, and turning it over to Charlotte Estridge.
Oh, thank you so much, Nancy. Hi, everybody. My name is Charlotte, and I'm from NYPIRG. You might know us. We are the student activist group on campus, and I'm going to share some information with you guys of pretty much what she just said, how to get registered, how to tackle getting to the polls and finding the information that you need, and kind of demystifying the process. So I just want to start by saying that NYPIRG is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, student-directed organization. So we work solely for the public interest, and that's completely managed by students. And part of that initiative is our voter education program. What's most important right now is that you get registered to vote, and that we can make sure that our family members and friends are also registered. So I'm going to drop this link in the chat right now, and I'm also going to start sharing my screen so that I can just walk you through the process step by step, but it will be a little quick. So save your questions for the end unless it's super urgent. Okay, here is the link. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so that will bring you to this page. This is to check your registration, and you can also find your polling location here. If you live in Brooklyn, that's Kings County. If you live in Queens, obviously that's Queens. You're gonna input your information, takes like 30 seconds, not even, and it'll bring you to this page. Sorry, I had to take screenshots because it shows my party affiliation and also my home address and stuff, and you guys don't need to know that stuff. But it brings you to this page, and it shows you your early voting poll site. So if I wanted to go vote early, that would be my location, and it also gives the hours for all of the early voting days. And early voting starts October 24th and ends November 1st. If you're interested in early voting, it's basically just an opportunity to vote in person to kind of avoid the crowds of election day on November 3rd. Then it also says my actual election day poll site. So that's where I would go if I was casting my vote in person. Obviously, this is not like New York City. I'm voting in upstate New York. And then if you scroll down, it shows your voter information. So it has your name, your address, it shows you your party, and it says your voter status. It needs to say active. If it says inactive, or if nothing shows up when you search it, you are in trouble, my friend. That means you cannot vote. You need to re-register. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. And then I just want to point out that it also has your district information. So if you're interested in finding out information on your local representatives, which I definitely recommend, this is how you would find that. So then moving on to my next topic, you can register to vote online. I don't know, man, I'm not a professional on Zoom at all. Okay, I'm trying to send you another link. Okay, sorry. Not a pro. So if you need to register to vote online, you should click this link. This is the DMV website, but to register online, you need a New York State photo ID, which looks like this. It's either a driver's license, a non-driver ID, or a permit. And you need the ID number and the document number. So the ID number is on the front, and it's this numeric code. And then the document number is on the back, and it's alphabetical. And that's all you need to register online. It takes about not even 5 minutes. It's as quick as you can input the information, you're done. And of course, your social security number. If you don't have a photo ID, unfortunately, you have to print the form and mail it yourself. We talked about voter disenfranchisement. This is one part of that huge problem. Not everybody has a printer. I know it's hard. I don't even own a printer. And then you would have to go to a print shop to print this. like will cost you like $2 or something, but it would definitely be worth it if you're not registered. I'll send these 2 links right now. There are 2 different forms. They look exactly the same and there's not a big difference in them. But if you're a CUNY student, you should apply using the CUNY D form. That's the first link I just sent. And if you're not a CUNY student, you should use the other form. The CUNY D form simply indicates that you are a student, and it gives more power to the student voice, which is why we recommend you do it. But you just will have to fill out this information when you print it out. Make sure you're a citizen. Will you be 18 before Election Day? If you're 16 or 17, you can still register. You won't be able to vote, but New York State will automatically enroll you as an active voter on your 18th birthday. You put in your birthday, all this other information, your address, and most importantly, you need one of the identification numbers, sorry. And I just want to point out that you need to fill out section 14. It's the one that asks you to enroll in a party. And just so you guys know, New York State has a two-party primary, which means that for the primary election, which has already passed, but this will be helpful for in the future, you can only vote in the primary if you are a registered Democrat or a Republican. It's a little unfortunate. Some other states are not like that. Some are more restrictive. But if you ever want to vote in the primary, I do recommend registering for one of the 2 parties that will allow you to do so. And then you just have to sign it. Then it gives you like the mailing address, put it in an envelope, get it in the mail. Next, I just want to talk quickly about absentee voting. It is super easy to vote by mail this year. Anybody can vote by mail because of COVID. You just have to select there's like a medical section saying you're afraid of getting the virus. And here's the link to request your absentee ballot. So I would recommend requesting it right now if you are going to vote by mail. Just because I requested mine 4 weeks ago and it just got here like 3 days ago. So it took a really long time and I just got it in the mail today. But when you get your absentee ballot, there are just a few things that I need to let you know so that they count your vote. So it's gonna come in an envelope and then it's gonna include 2 envelopes, a set of instructions, and your ballot. Treat the ballot as if it's a Scantron, right? Is that what they're called? For like standardized testing. It's been a minute since I had to fill one of those out, but treat it like one of those, meaning be very careful about filling in the circles and make sure you fill in the right one for your expected answer. Like, you need to use blue or black pen. Other colors, they're not going to count your ballot. Blue or black only, needs to be pen. Then once you have filled out all the circles, you fold it up and you put it inside one of the envelopes, and it's kind of like an affidavit. So you sign it and you date it, and that's to verify that you're like who you say you are. So your signature needs to match the one on record of like on your New York State ID or whatever. And then you put that envelope inside of the return envelope. It does not include postage, so you need to get a stamp. I put 2 stamps on mine just to be safe. I would recommend doing that because they don't tell you how many you need. And then drop it in the mail, or you can actually bring it to the Board of Elections. I think it's easier to just put it in the mail though. And as long as you put it in the mail on or before November 3rd, your ballot will be counted. I do not recommend waiting until November 3rd to put it in the mail. Like at the very latest, November 2nd. But like, if you just have it, it's an envelope, it's already there, just put it in the mail. We don't really have time to make excuses for ourselves. So yeah, I'm gonna stop screen sharing now, and I'm almost done, I promise. I know maybe that was a little hard to follow, but I'm doing my best. So everybody in the chat, can you reply? Are you an active voter? I want you to just look that up, like in the link I sent you. Are you an active voter? Reply yes or no. Your ballot does not need a witness signature. Ah, so many yeses. This is fantastic. Great. And so you should all develop a voting plan. That basically means you should know what you're going to do to cast your ballot. Like my voting plan, I'm voting by mail. Excuse me. And I already voted. I cast the ballot today, like 2 hours ago, I dropped it off. So like, yay me. Other people, what is your plan? Will you cast your ballot in person? Will you vote in early voting? Reply in the chat. Do you know? In-person voting, by mail? I'm curious. I want to know. A lot of early voting. Awesome, guys. Just make sure that when you go to the polls in person, you bring your photo ID. That is super important. It's the law that they need to check your photo ID, and if you don't bring it, they're not going to let you vote. So make sure you bring your photo ID. Yes, make sure you bring a mask. You should probably bring hand sanitizer too, just because. But once you're there in person, somebody will explain to you how to cast the ballot. It's usually pretty straightforward, but sometimes it changes year to year. So it might be like a paper that you sign or fill out and then they scan it, or it could just be an electronic machine. And so I'll just wrap up why I'm here basically. And I want to say that if you would like any notifications about activist activities happening on CCNY campus, in like the virtual sense of the word, I'm going to drop this link for our student network. Fill it out and we'll add you to our weekly email chain. We'll be able to send you stuff when we have like events or other educational opportunities or like important petitions, things that affect you as a student and as a citizen. And I see that somebody asked if you can all become poll watchers. Actually, being a poll watcher, you need to be like selected individually by like the polling coordinator for that section, but you can become a poll worker. And you don't have to be a citizen to be a poll worker. All you have to be is a New York City resident. And you can register. You can submit an application for that online. Vanessa just dropped the link for that. Thank you so much. I registered and I'm really excited because if you work all 10 days, you can make just under $3 grand, which is a lot of money. If you are healthy and you are not like at risk or something, definitely this is a really great way to participate in your democracy. And you don't have to work every day. Like I have a job, I can't work during the week. They have Saturday and Sunday shifts too. And I think you just have to apply by this weekend because the training stuff is due on Monday. So submit that ASAP if you want to do it. But that's all I have for you. I can answer questions in the Q&A part, but thank you guys. I'll throw it back to Nancy now.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I mean, this was just a load of really valuable and important information. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. We're going to have a little moment to share a short video on voting. So let's see. Professor Falk, will you cue the video?
How does a system work with democratically elected leaders chosen every 4 years by well-trusted procedures so everyone can help fulfill the founding fathers' vision? If people don't take part in the decision.
Thanks, Beverly. Well done. So I just wanted to make a couple of comments and then open it up for questions, comments, discussion. First of all, I'd like to add our thanks for the support for the student group, Teachers of Tomorrow. And for those of you who are in graduate school, that's an organization of undergraduates, but I think, their work is really thoughtful and engaged. And so I think we should figure out a way to connect the undergrads and the graduates, but they also supported this event. The other thing I wanted to mention is it is significant if you are a CUNY student to identify yourself as such and to also participate in voting, not only in the presidential election, but also on the local elections, because those votes impact decisions about tuition hikes, about funding for CUNY, and those are real, true bread and butter issues for all of us at City College in particular, but CUNY in general. And so, you know, that's one way you can hold elected officials accountable for voting, to increase your tuition, you know, you want them to increase the funding for City College. And so using the vote in that way is also very helpful, just in your lives at City College. So I'd like to open it up a little bit to you for some questions, comments. There's been a lot of information shared this evening. It's really exciting that so many people have plans to vote. And so, yes. We have, and Vanessa Valdez just posted the link. If you haven't filled out the census, please do so. You have until October 31st. That's also extremely important, because that's something that's very important, because it's not just, the census isn't to count citizens only, it counts everybody in the United States. And that's how funding is allocated. That's how representatives are allocated. So when they draw the congressional districts, they do it based on population. And so every person can fill it out. And so, which is a little bit different for voting. So yes, so please, everybody, if you have comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Oh, I see that there's a comment about having School of Education students to be added to the Teachers of Tomorrow mailing list. Thank you very much. I think that's a great idea. And thank you. That's a great idea. So while people are maybe warming up, would either of the presenters like to add some information or say a little bit more now that we've heard more things?
I forgot to mention the deadline to register to vote is Friday, this Friday. That's why you're doing it today. If you are not registered, do it today, tonight. I am like your calling beacon from the universe. This was a sign. Just get registered.
I also wanted to say that to learn more about what we do at the Black Studies program, you can follow us on Instagram at Black Studies CCNY, which I'll put in the chat, and you will see the deadlines for voting. One of the main things I've been posting about, I post on that, I'm in charge of that Instagram account, is the census, voting, and also just balancing resources for moving through this world at this moment. So resources with regards to the pandemic, testing, anything related to that. So, and CCNY TOT, I follow you all on Instagram. So I always love learning what my colleagues across the campus are doing. And NIPERG, actually. NIPERG is NIPERG CCNY, so thank you.
May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So first, thank you to the three panelists. You were fantastic. You mentioned different reasons that prevent people from voting, from obstacles imposed by local governments to not having a stamp or having to print a form. I was thinking, as you were talking about those reasons, I was thinking about just plain apathy, just not feeling engaged, just feeling like this is for other people, not for me, much much like the young girl, the young lady in the video. What do you think are the real reasons for that? Putting aside not having a stamp, a printer, different obstacles, racism, and other social issues, what do you think is the real reason for the apathy that we see in so many people?
I think we can't discount the lack of civics education in this country. I think we cannot discount the fact that we don't know how the system works at all, right? So for example, the relationship between the census and congressional districts, I think like people don't know that, right? I think acknowledging that sometimes the candidates are not the most exciting candidates and being honest about that, right? I mean, I was teaching my Black Studies 102 class yesterday, and I laid out my voting principles because the students, the student said, well, this is what I know about this sitting president. This is what I know about the Democratic candidate. And I don't know. I don't know. And I said, well, here's what I know. And having honest conversations because, quite frankly, if you think my vote doesn't count, nothing is going to change, and there's not enough people make a connection between, hey, when is my garbage getting picked up with the vote, right? Or just like our daily lives, right? They don't see the connection. And so I think it is incumbent upon us, those of us who have a platform, and PS, all of us have a platform. I'm not just talking, to my colleagues, the professors in the room, right? If you have a social media account, you have a platform, like, period. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to read up on what all of this is, try to learn as much as we can, but by the same token, understand, when folks are saying, it's not going to do anything, that's a conversation. That's not just castigation, I think. But also balance out how much emotional energy you can devote to that and live in this world, right? But I think acknowledging that there are very real reasons for why people feel like they're not going to make a difference. Yeah.
I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
You go. I can wait.
Okay. I think just one big reason is that Election Day isn't a holiday. A lot of people cannot take off from work, and if you have to wait in line for many hours, that's disenfranchisement. If you can't take off from work, if you can't cast your ballot because you're working, that's disenfranchisement. We need to really reevaluate our priorities as a country, and why are we not registering people to vote right away automatically like other countries do? Why are we not making it easy to get to the polls? I think a lot of that stuff is a big reason. And then because they can't do that, it feeds into the lack of education and stuff, because then they're like, well, if I can't even go cast it, I know my vote doesn't matter. They don't even care if I go vote in the first place. So I think it's really hard to disconnect those. And sorry, go ahead.
I would agree with everything that everybody said. I think that one of the things that I was always concerned about is almost the religious nature that people in my community, especially my family, looked at voting, right? And so I'm kind of old. So if you're my age, you grew up in a traditional African-American Southern family, Martin Luther King, Jesus, and Kennedy was definitely on your wall. This is not mythology. There were pictures on my grandmother's wall, right? And when they became disheartened, it was almost as if they lost faith. And what I tried to teach my staff and my students is that this is strategy. See, if you look at it as almost a religious expression that's going to save you and free you, and we're all going to be dancing in the streets when we get someone in power that's going to make everything okay, you will never be satisfied. That is never going to happen, right? But if you look at it as political civic strategy, and that you are clear what that strategy is and you demystify it, then you can kind of do the win-loss kind of evaluation. And that for me is the difficult thing of changing, my parents, not just the students, but the parents, when they come and we talk about this type of civic engagement, it's like, well, nothing's ever going to change. And I said, well, I can make you a guarantee right now. I can read the future for you right now. And that is, if you do nothing, nothing will change.
Right.
That I can guarantee you. I cannot guarantee you if you vote that something's going to change. I can damn sure guarantee you that if you don't do anything, nothing's going to change. It's a shot. And just that people take a greater shot playing at gambling than they do at the civic engagement and transforming the lives of their community, right? And so I think that that's it. It's one, how do we do strategic actions, right? And demystify, pull all those other things down and sweep them away and look at it as strategic action, and that we take gambles all the time. We take shots all the time, right? This is the shot that everybody should take.
I did also want to say, April, to your point in the chat about the popular vote does not seem to matter. There was a change that happened between the 2016 and 2020 election. In the 2016 election, you saw states that had the popular vote had gone for Hillary Clinton, and electors of the Electoral College actually went for Donald Trump, which is why he gains the why he won the election. And this past summer, I believe the Supreme Court actually made a unanimous decision such that electors must follow the popular vote of their states, like unanimously, 9-0. Okay, so that's a very big change because I think that that was understood in the past, and yet under this administration, those things which were once deemed as understood now needed to be made explicit in law. And so there is that change, and it's really, really important.
I also wanted to pick up on something that Tabari just raised about voting as strategy. And I think it speaks back to the point you just made, Vanessa, about the importance of the popular vote and how that makes a difference in the presidential election this time that it may not have last time. I think this notion about voting and that when we, in the past, when voting was sort of like an act of faith, that it was really like we were turning over things to others to fix. And I think now the realization is that our vote is the beginning of the conversation, not the end of it. And so when we cast our vote, just as, it's been so inspiring, quite frankly, to have watched the series of protests over these last months, because there's huge engagement and what's happening is matters. And so a continuation of this conversation about how we want how we want to live our lives together is also voting at the ballot box. But then after that, we're not just giving over the keys of the kingdom to others to fix it, but that we're there to hold people accountable for the promises that they make and for the policies that they say they support, and that we do have opportunities to engage and hold them accountable, not only at the ballot box, but also on a local level. City council members have tremendous sway with the city budget. Teens Take Charge, some of you have been involved with that. Also Integrate NYC have been incredible advocates for integrating New York City public schools. And they have testified before the city council to advocate for policies to integrate New York City public schools and to equalize funding. And so these are things that as educators, we can join with students and support them at the ballot box, in a whole host of ways. And so that's why we began this. But in terms of thinking about the significance of your voice and your vote, if your vote wasn't important and if your voice wasn't important to be heard, why would there be so much money invested in keeping you quiet and keeping you home and separating you from the right you have to vote? It's so important. And we need your voices to be heard as young people so that you can shape the future and the lives that you live moving forward. It shouldn't just be one group or another. So I'll get off my soapbox now. Would anybody else like to add?
I just wanted to add, I put it in the chat, but you know,
Okay.
we're all educators here, and our job is to support the development of our young learners. And we can do that by creating democratic communities in our own classrooms and making opportunities for our young learners to have their voice heard, and even to model voting in the classroom and how that can make a difference for how the life of the classroom is conducted. So if we start nurturing that understanding early on in children's lives, we'll have better chances that we'll have more active citizenry as those children grow up.
Thank you for that, Beverly. That's really important.
So we have come to 6 o'clock. It's actually 6:01, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And I want to say thank you all so much. Thank you to our presenters. And thank you to each and every one of you who've attended and participated. And please take the information back, stay connected, and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you all to the people who sponsored and organized this event. And thank you all for being engaged, and have a good evening. Stay safe.